All right, so hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Unstuck and On Target, Improving Young People's Executive Function Skills. So before we get started, I want to go over just a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You'll see on my screen, I have a screenshot of the attendee interface. You should see something akin to this on your own computer desktop in the upper right-hand corner. When you join today's webinar, you selected to join either by phone or computer audio. If for whatever reason you'd like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. You'll also have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane on your control panel. You can send those questions in at any time and we'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. The presentation and handouts are also available in the handout pane of your control panel. You can download these at any time during the presentation. I would now like to introduce today's speakers, Drs. Laura Anthony and John Strang. Dr. Laura Anthony is a clinical psychologist and clinical researcher with Children's Hospital of Colorado and the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Dr. John Strang is a clinical neuropsychologist and clinical researcher with the Children's National Medical Center and the George Washington University School of Medicine. Dr. Laura Anthony will start today's presentation, so without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Laura. Take it away.
Thanks, Alex. So I see here we have a picture of all of the kind of original Unstuck development team. We've added some members to this team, so I'll be showing pictures of them later, but they weren't at this particular meeting. So this is the OG 5 here, the original ones, and I'm the one in the middle. The thing that I think is interesting for you all to hear is, or maybe it's kind of like the secret sauce to our success, is that we're a very interdisciplinary team. Lauren Kenworthy is a neuropsychologist. Katie Alexander is an occupational therapist. I'm a clinical psychologist and a therapist. Lynn Cannon is a amazing special education teacher. And Monica Warner has been a program administrator and a parent coach. So we're a pretty diverse group in terms of professions, and I think that's part of what has made Unstuck kind of unique. I'm going to start with an overview of how we launched our research and intervention programs, and then I'm going to turn it over to John to tell you more specifically about a OR-funded project, with a little bit about the results, and some things you can do today. His program is with middle schoolers, as you'll see, things you can do today to work on executive functioning in the kids that you care about. Okay, whoops, sorry, too far. So it all kind of started with OR back in 2007, giving us our very first grant. We had written a proposal to take an intervention that we were kind of working on developing in a special education school that's amazing called Ivy Mound School. And we wanted to really bring it to manualization and do a small pilot study there. And that's what OR funded, which really got everything else started. From there, we got a grant from the National Institute of Mental Health to further develop the program. And in that project, we tested it in, let me see, what is the number? 20-ish schools. And that project was just with kids with autism and really getting a lot of input from the schools and from the kids themselves to have an intervention that was kind of the best we could possibly do and also have the best effect. So we're specifically targeting executive functions broadly, but specifically flexibility and planning. Those were kind of gaps in interventions that are already available and out there, and yet cause a lot of difficulties for many of us, including those of us on the spectrum. And so this is really, we designed this with kind of that need in mind. From that project, we published our first manual. That's with Brooks Publishing. So we took everything we learned from those 2 previous trials, incorporated everybody's feedback, and got the manual out and published. This version is no longer available, but if you happen to have a copy, the evidence does still stand for this version. This one is designed specifically for kids with autism, ages 7 to 11 or 12, for kids who have at least a 7-ish verbal ability, the verbal ability of a 7-year-old. And it is designed as a curriculum to be done in schools. So it could be done by anybody in the school. Doesn't have to be a special education teacher or school psychologist or anybody. It can be done by anybody in the school. So the first version was doing really well, and we were excited by it. One of the things we heard was happening a lot was they were expanding the group of kids that they were putting into the Unstuck groups. So what they were doing was adding in other kids with maybe anxiety, or a lot of kids with ADHD who had difficulties with planning and flexible thinking. So we decided we would test this, test sort of an expansion of the intervention. And PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, gave us a large grant, a large Addressing Disparities grant, to test this in Title I schools, which means they have a large percentage of low-income families who students are in those schools. And in that trial, we were testing Unstuck and On Target with kids with either autism or ADHD or both, and also who have the executive function difficulties of flexibility and planning. So that large trial kept us really busy for a long time, and we're working hard at getting those publications out. We have written an article already about lessons that we learned from the trials. That one is not on here. This publication is presenting the results from our initial NIH trial. That was in 2014. And based on that article, the 2014 article, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality included Unstuck and On Target as an effective intervention for kids with autism. One of the best days ever when I saw that on the list. I probably would have argued with them because at that point it was only in one trial, and that's not a whole lot of evidence, but I was pretty happy about it anyway. One of the things that we did with the initial edition was create parent trainings and a parent manual. A manual is not really quite right, a parent guide that includes the basics of what executive function is and how it can impact kids with autism. And then there's troubleshooting and lots of helpful IEP goals and that sort of thing. That is still available and is published by Brooks Publishing again. But the parent book was not reaching as many families as we had hoped to reach. It's a small book, but partly maybe because Brooks Publishing doesn't typically publish things for parents, or the school version was doing really well. We really wanted a way that made the information more accessible to families, no matter where they were. So they didn't have to come and see us clinically. So the next thing we did was wrote a grant to the National Institute of Mental Health to create an online parent training program. We did this with 3C Institute, and then tested the model of having an in-person parent training against an online parent training, online-only parent training, and then both groups got the book as supporting materials for free. And there were no differences in effectiveness or how parents felt about the training or empowerment, whether they felt like they could make some changes and help their kids. So from there, we really have a little bit of evidence that if we can do things online, like this webinar, we can have a broader effect and therefore disseminate to more people so that they can implement it. If you'd like to take a look at that parent training, you can find it at unstuckontarget.com. And in your handouts is a little bit about the findings from that online course and how you can get there. So then from our PCORI trial, where we did Unstuck and on Target with both kids with ADHD or autism, we published a new version that was not only autism specific, was more general, and comes as a kit that teachers or school staff can use without needing to build a lot of stuff. So not needing to make the game boards, which takes a lot of time, and they said they didn't like having extra work. So now all of the posters and game boards and everything, you can just kind of pick up the kit and use it with the stuff that you've got in schools. And this is another handout about the Unstuck School Program. If anybody wants to advocate for a principal, you can download this little pictograph and say this is the rationale for who can do it, what's it supposed to do, and then, of course, does it work? Because we don't want to be disseminating any kind of intervention if we haven't proven that it works. So that's in your handouts. And we have started with a couple of published abstracts, one by Lauren Kenworthy. We have another one by Katie Alexander, and hopefully the primary outcomes, secondary outcomes from that trial will get published soon. Publishing is hard. We had two recent publications that came out that did not involve our group, which is great. This one was also including Unstuck and on Target as an effective intervention for, this one I think was specific for kids with autism based on the first version. And we have another publication come out from a group that took the original Green Book, adapted it to a clinic program, and did a small trial showing that it was effective when administered as a clinical program, not only, in a clinic, not only as a school program. So coming up next, we are excited to hear about a PCORI implementation project, which would take our teacher school staff training and put it all online also. This one comes with enough funding that that online training would then be available for free forever, and school staff can get CEUs for that, and see if that helps with broader dissemination and implementation, since we can't drive to every school and do the trainings. And trainings really are probably not necessary, but people really, the school staff said they really like to see how it works before they do it. We will hear finally about that in March, but so far it is looking really good for getting funded for that project. Woohoo. So the middle school version launched a little bit later, but you see here it started again with OR funding, and that is John Strang, who you'll be hearing more from. So this is designed for kids 6 through 8 in grades 6 through 8. So it's kind of the next step up from the elementary school version of Unstuck. And after that OR funding, he got a Autism Science Foundation grant that allowed him to do follow-ups on the kids who had gone through the OR trial in public schools, which is really cool. That intervention will hopefully be published again by Brooks Publishing in 2020. It has already been through review. They are going to publish it. John and everybody else is working hard on making those final revisions from the feedback that they got from the trial and from reviews. And then finally, that's Cara Pugliese. She also got an OR grant. This one is to work on a high school and transition age project. So kids who are transitioning out of high school and into career or college, flexible thinking and planning for them to prepare them for the, world outside of school. And then after she got the OR project, she very soon also got a K award from NIMH, which broadens the ability to do that trial, but also to collect brain imaging and some pretty fancy outcomes. The next thing we have kind of on our docket is up there at the top of the screen. We are working now on a preschool Unstuck that we have done clinically, and now thinking about ways to get that out into the preschools where it can reach more kids than in the clinic. So that's the overview, the general timeline. I know I've kind of gone through it really quickly, but I want to make sure that John has enough time to give you some details about the middle school version, because that's the really exciting part. But I just want to thank OR for always, believing in us and getting us started. And I think it's a great example how even these small pilot studies or seed grants really can grow into some pretty amazing intervention research. Like we're a big team now. We started out with kind of that original 5, but boy, have a lot of people been involved in these projects. Really exciting. So thank you to OR. All right, John, I turn it over to you.
All right, well, hello everyone. This is John Strang. Thanks for tuning in today. I want to echo Laura's thanks to the Organization for Autism Research for their support of our work, and a special thanks to OR for funding our study of Unstuck and On Target grades 6 through 8, the curriculum that I will be describing today. Now, executive function, I'm trying to advance the slide. Sorry for the pause, just trying to, there we go. All right. Executive function demands increase and change as young people progress through their school years and into adulthood. Therefore, as Laura has described, we've created this series of executive function interventions, each tailored to a specific period in development. And today I'm going to focus on the middle school version, which is designed for youth age 11 to 15. As Laura mentioned, this is a curriculum that is moving quickly toward publication. We hope that it will be available by the end of next year. And today we wanted to give you a sneak peek of the intervention, how it was developed, some of the intervention techniques, and also a quick review of the findings from the OR-funded trial of this curriculum. Each of our curricula across this age range is developed for use in schools and also can be applied in other group settings. The teaching approaches emphasize practice and doing, and the classes are more like a music or gym class than typical academic instruction. Most importantly, across all of these curricula, the aim is for the interventions to be fun, to link the use of executive function skills with a sense of joy and success. Like all of the other curricula in the series, Unstuck and Untarget, the middle school version, is a community-based intervention. It was created through rich community partnerships. It is designed to be given in real-world community settings, especially public schools, by interventionists who do not need to be autism experts. Key stakeholders, including teachers, school administrators, autistic youth, and their parents, partnered with clinician researchers to develop and refine the curriculum. The intervention was developed through a multi-stage design process, as you can see in this slide. We started with the successful Unstuck and Untarget elementary school program as a jumping off point. The multidisciplinary team then worked to identify key executive function targets that were specifically important to teens. And the resulting approaches were piloted in clinical groups over 3 years. Autistic youth and their parents provided weekly feedback, lots of feedback, especially around activities and vocabulary that they didn't like. So there was much revision. The resulting curriculum was piloted in a private school with teachers and youth, again providing feedback to inform an additional revision. This was followed by a randomized controlled trial in the public schools as funded by OR, and then a final revision is happening currently based on the feedback from teachers, students, and parents in the RCT. Now, we're going to step back for a moment to consider what executive function is. For those of you who are new to the concept of executive function or who need a quick refresher, these skills include the ability to manage impulses, to delay for a larger reward, to think and behave flexibly instead of getting stuck, to manage emotions and self-regulate. And executive function also includes what we call metacognition, the ability to hold ideas in mind in order to set goals and plan, which allows for future thinking. Executive function also includes the ability to organize information and to do what we call big picture thinking, and to monitor your progress in moving toward a goal and course correct if necessary. So we developed the teen version of Unstuck and Untarget to address the critical need for improving these executive skills in autistic adolescents. As autistic youth get older, and especially as they enter the teen years, we know that they fall further behind their peers in terms of meeting executive demands. Consider middle school. Students have to manage up to 7 different teachers, longer-term assignments, independent work, and they have to conjure the motivation to engage in tasks that are important, but not necessarily immediately rewarding. With the teen version of Unstuck and Untarget, we aim to address the executive challenges of autistic adolescents at school and in their daily lives, but we also have an eye on the future. We know that the level of executive functioning of an autistic teen predicts their future adaptive functioning. And we also know that the vast majority of autistic adults with average or above intelligence fail to achieve full independence. And so, by intervening during the teen years, we hope to impact long-term outcomes. Now, there is a specific profile of executive function differences common in autism. I want to pause for a second and just point out that I use the word executive function differences instead of weaknesses. And that's because although these differences may be challenges and problems in some settings, they can also be harnessed as strengths. Very common for autistic people, there are differences in flexibility, such as the ability to get stuck on topics, which may lead to special interests, the use of scripts and repetition. Autistic people may be less comfortable with change, and they may have a strength for routine. Autistic people may also have differences with organization and integration. This is common, such as the exquisite ability to focus on details, an interest in systems, the ability to learn rote facts, but also less big picture thinking, less integration, and less future thinking. Now, in our work developing this intervention, we kept coming back to the question of how best to teach these executive function skills. This is because executive function is not like academic subjects. It's really not about learning facts. It's not even really about learning concepts. And doing well on a knowledge test about executive function skills would probably have very little to do with your actual executive functioning. Executive functioning is much more like sports or martial arts or music. And these are activities and skills that are taught typically in fun settings that have to do more with doing and building automatic habits. So by taking these ideas of how to teach executive function through fun activities and doing, and merging this with what we know about the autistic thinking style, we aim for a phenotype-specific intervention approach, a teaching approach that is carefully aligned with how autistic youth can best grow their executive function abilities. The curriculum targets those aspects of executive challenge experienced by many autistic youth, especially their differences in flexibility, organization, planning, big picture thinking, and future thinking. And the curriculum uses this executive profile in autism as the means of teaching new executive skills. Specifically, it builds on that special ability of kids on the autism spectrum to get stuck on things, and in this case, to get stuck on flexibility and planning routines. A young person's inflexibility can in this way actually help them to ultimately become more flexible. Similarly, the intervention harnesses the ability of autistic youth to focus and learn at the detail level, as opposed to more global or gestalt learning. Ideas and concepts are presented in the curriculum in very small units that over the course of the intervention build up to larger, more big picture ideas. For teens on the autism spectrum, things click in terms of that big picture thinking after they've assembled the individual units of meaning piece by piece. One of the central active components of this curriculum and of all of the Unstuck curricula for all ages is the use of scripts, that is, words and vocabulary. This is a way of harnessing that special ability of autistic youth to get stuck on details. And so scripts is a word that we often use in autism to describe a kind of behavior, often a language behavior, of repeating chunks of language that maybe some young people on the autism spectrum may imitate from movies or shows, sometimes without apparent comprehension, but sometimes scripts are used in more subtle ways. And then as kids get older, this may go underground a little bit, and we hear more just repeated phrases in speech, like a sentence that might start with actually. Actually, I went to the beach. Actually, I saw a shark. Actually, so on. When we use scripts as part of this intervention, we can help autistic youth to get stuck on the useful words and ideas, and in this case, executive function techniques. Scripts are not new. They've been part of cognitive behavioral therapies for a long time, but in this intervention, they really come to the fore as one of the most important active ingredients. If you're thinking about using scripts for interventions, we think a lot here about what makes a good script. Typically, these are words, phrases, routines, or formulas, which can be used in many different situations, that is generalized between school and home and grandparents, music class. We also would look for words which fit in everyday conversation if possible, because we want autistic youth to use this language every day, and we don't want them to stand out for the unusualness of the language. And also, these should be words that represent key skill targets. So with scripts, we encourage interventionists, parents, everyone around a child in everyday life to use them to describe what they're going through, to live out loud. The goal is to get the students to like these scripts and routines and to see the power in them. We want to avoid negative associations with scripts because kids can become allergic to language. So it is critical to use scripts in positive situations and for praise, and not as criticism, critique, or correction. So this is a very tricky thing, I think, at the beginning of using scripts for some people, because they want to intervene early at those moments of crisis. And yet what we really want to do is get kids stuck on scripts and to fall in love with them and not associate them with the negative until they're ready to use them and they've become automatic, and then they can be used more easily in those more urgent moments. Here we have some of the central scripts, the vocabulary and phrases used in the middle school Unstuck. And so we'll start with flexible thinking. As with all of the Unstuck programs, the concept and language of flexibility is emphasized and celebrated. The idea here is to help students understand when it is most powerful for them to be stuck and when it is most powerful for them to be unstuck. Both of these are important skills. Students are praised for their use of flexibility skills, and the interventionist models situations of getting stuck and asking the students to help them get unstuck. These words, flexible, flexible thinking, stuck, unstuck, and plan A, plan B, are integrated into everyday interactions. So a teacher might say, "Thank you for helping me see a plan B. I was stuck on my plan A, but you helped me to think flexibly." Now, a special kind of stuck is described in the middle school curriculum, and that is being stuck on a detail, which is something that kids on the spectrum are very good at doing. The students are drawn to consider how, like the adjustable zoom of a camera, sometimes it's useful to be stuck on details, and other times it's most useful to widen that view to the big picture. And so these two scripts are often yoked. Stuck on a detail and big picture thinking are linked as two options. The script power, that is, the power to get more of what you want or need, encourages motivation and provides a rationale for students to use the new executive skills as a means of gaining more influence over their lives. And we have learned in our testing of this curriculum that many autistic teens want more power to have a positive influence in the world, to address in their own ways things like global climate change and injustice. This kind of linking to real world goals really gets them revved up to engage in this kind of work. And finally, the social aspects of executive function are also richly targeted in the intervention, including a routine for how to compromise. Here's one of the central visuals of the curriculum. In addition to the use of scripts, students are presented with unifying visuals to play to the common strength in autism of visual learning. In this case, your power, that is getting more of what you want and need, having more choice, reaching goals, getting rewards. Your power increases when you are flexible, when you use big picture thinking, and when you engage in goal setting and planning. The scripts and visuals are introduced across the 30-lesson curriculum through a series of successive planning challenges. The first unit introduces a no-fail party planning activity, which helps the students learn that planning can be enjoyable and not overly difficult. The second unit challenges the class to agree upon a fun goal using the newly learned compromise skill. In the third unit, the group plans for a longer-term goal of their choosing. We found that autistic teens often pick goals that are altruistic and related to their care for the world and concern for social justice. And the final unit turns to individual personal goals and the question of how to get more power to make a difference in our own lives. This is another key visual called the power plan. And this is one of the attachments that is included in this training today. So if you're interested in using this, you can download it as a PDF. Each lesson is introduced with this visual, and it is used for all of the group and individual planning. Here, a student or the class or a parent steps through the planning process, giving themselves credit for each step by drawing an incremental line at the top of the planning arrow leading toward power So first, you set your goal, and you're a third of the way there. You figure out why it's important. Well, figuring out your motivation is really key, so you need to give yourself some credit. You get halfway there. You come up with your plan and the steps of that plan. You're 2/3 of the way there. You figure out a plan B in case things don't go the way you expect. You're 3/4 of the way. And finally, you check the plan by thinking through the steps. You've really already arrived then. So this is a way of reminding young people that all of the efforts that they make in what we call planning and goal setting, that they get credit by drawing that line across, and that that's something that's meaningful and important. Now, the visual also highlights the risk of getting stuck. So say that you're 3/4 of the way through, but you get distracted, stuck on another topic. The teacher might say, oh, okay, we can get stuck on that. Let's just draw the line down to stuck. And I can tell you that for autistic teens, this is not something that they necessarily want to have happen. And so this visual itself helps to keep them in the groove of the planning process and unstuck. So now we're going to finish with a brief look at the initial testing of this intervention. We designed a comparative randomized trial comparing Unstuck and On Target grades 6 to 8 to an established social skills intervention, the Program for Education and Enrichment of Relational Skills, or PEERS for short. The goal of this trial was to investigate the different impacts of these two interventions. PEERS has been shown to increase socialization, improve social skills, and reduce anxiety in autistic teens. Unstuck and On Target specifically targets executive function skills. But we were also interested in the possible cross-domain impacts, given the interrelatedness of executive function and social capacity. Executive function interventions have previously been shown to improve social skills, and there is some evidence of social skill intervention improving executive functioning. The curricula were randomized by school, with 9 public middle schools participating. The interventions were given by school staff, with study staff training the teachers. There were 2 parent training sessions offered during the school year. The pre-post evaluations assessed executive function, social skills, and anxiety. This was a small trial with a total of 31 participants. All of the teens were diagnosed with autism without intellectual disability. 5 schools with a total of 17 students were randomized to Unstuck and On Target, and 4 schools with a total of 14 students were randomized to PEERS. The 2 intervention groups were well matched across demographics, IQ, and autism symptoms, and the sample included many girls on the autism spectrum. Executive skills were tested across 3 modalities. Classroom observations, in which the observer was masked to the intervention group, were conducted in the students' English classes. The observer achieved reliability in these observations and provided yes/no ratings of on-task behavior, participation, managing transitions, and getting stuck. The executive function challenge task, the second line here, has been previously used in Unstuck intervention studies. It is an interactive interview which rates the young person's responses to a series of flexibility and planning challenges. For example, the student is asked to make a design out of clay, and then midway through is interrupted and told to make something different. This measure was administered by a masked evaluator, unaware of treatment group. We also included a cognitive planning task, the Tower of London. Social functioning was assessed with the Parent Report Social Responsiveness Scale, and anxiety measured with the new Scahill Anxiety Scale, designed specifically for autistic youth. This table represents our hypotheses going into the trial. We predicted that the Unstuck and On Target grades 6 through 8 group would show pre-post gains on the 3 executive function measures, as well as on the social measure. This prediction was based on the previous findings with the elementary school version of Unstuck. The PEERS group was expected, based on previous studies, to show improvements in social functioning and anxiety. We did not know if the peers group would make gains in executive skills. We also did not know if the Unstuck and On-Target group would show improved anxiety, but we were interested in the anxiety question given the linkages between the executive function and emotional systems. At baseline, the groups did not differ significantly on any of the measures. Because we had a very small sample, we were powered for t-tests with pre-post scores. And so this table reflects the results with significant pre-post gains marked in green and non-significant findings in gray. The numbers represent Cohen's d effect sizes, where 0.3 is a small effect, 0.5 a medium effect, and 0.8 or higher a large effect. The Unstuck and On-Target group showed gains in classroom observations and the challenge task, with large effect size gains on the mass classroom observations and gains approaching the large effect size range on the challenge task. Neither group showed gains on the Tower of London. The Unstuck and On-Target group showed medium-sized improvements on the social and anxiety measures. The peers group, as predicted, showed large effect size improvements on the social measure and improvements approaching the large effect size range on the anxiety measure. The peers group did not show significant gains on the executive measures. We also took a look at the index level scores on the social measure, the SRS, which separates restricted and repetitive behaviors versus social cognition. The Unstuck and On-Target group showed large effect size reductions in restricted and repetitive behaviors at post-test, and the peers group showed large effect size improvements in social cognition. And so our overall findings from this trial funded by OR were that the peers group improved in parent-reported social functioning and especially social cognition, and also parent-reported anxiety. The Unstuck and On-Target middle school edition group improved in parent-reported social functioning, parent-reported anxiety, observable executive function behaviors in the classroom that were observed by an observer who was unaware of the treatment group, and also observable executive function behaviors in an unfamiliar challenging situation that was assessed with the executive function challenge task. And so our next steps for the middle school Unstuck is publication, hopefully next year. We are also currently analyzing our long-term follow-up data, 1 year post-intervention, and we are aiming for a larger scale trial with the grant application currently under review. So with that, I will give you my email if people wish to reach out. And also, especially, draw you to the Unstuck and On-Target Facebook group, where there are updates and information about the various curricula. And you can use that link, or if you are on Facebook, you just type in Unstuck and On-Target, and you'll find it as the first link that pops up. And so with that, I'm going to turn this back to Alex, and we have some time for some questions today.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And thanks, everyone, for your attendance again today. I'm going to open it up for some Q&A at this point. So if you haven't already, now's a good time to submit those questions into the Questions tab of your control panel. One moment as I review these incoming questions. Okay. So our first question today is from Kate Ness. Which social communication questionnaire was used during this comparison? So, referring to what you were just discussing, John.
Yes, so we used the social communication, the social responsiveness scale, the SRS, and we used the most updated version, the SRS-2, which is a normed measure measuring a range of different aspects of social functioning, and especially social functioning in autism.
Very good, thank you. Next question here is from Robin. Would you suggest using the curriculum based on client's age or development level, or merge/individualize between both age and development level?
I'm going to let Dr. Anthony address this question.
Okay. So I think that's a really great question. We have generally set the standard for the content in the curricula around verbal age. So it's at least 7 years old verbal age for the elementary school curriculum. The middle school is, you can go down to, if you're 12 years old, down to a verbal level on a standardized test of 70, and that's who it was tested with. In terms of developmental level, though, that is a little bit more difficult because we are designing these interventions to be cycling so that a kid could benefit if they went through all 3 interventions. Obviously, they haven't done that yet because they're not all 3 published, but with this idea that at the younger ages, there's a greater focus on flexible thinking, kind of that cognitive skill, and some on planning. And then as we get older, there's a greater need for planning, and the planning gets more complex and with kind of greater challenges. John, do you want to add anything to that answer?
Just a bit. So when we worked with the large public school district for the middle school trial, we encountered some schools using the elementary school program in high school for kids with reduced language skills, and of course that hasn't been studied, so we don't know how well that works. But we heard positive things from the teachers that the students were responding. So that ability to perhaps track the curricula with, as Laura said, the language level or the developmental level may have some promise.
Very good. Next question came a little earlier in the presentation from Bonnie. I know this was covering elementary and middle school curriculum, but are there resources you can suggest to help high school age and young adults?
The high school aged curriculum will probably be available 2022, which sounds really, really far away to me, but I guess we're almost in 2020. That one will follow the middle school curriculum, probably with publication at Brooks. It takes a lot of work to publish a curriculum, I have to tell you. So that is, not quite available yet. For older individuals, like after high school, either in college or career, Laura Klinger has a great program called T-STEP. That's through Teach in North Carolina. You could contact her about that program if you don't happen to live in North Carolina. Many of us don't. And that curriculum is also not yet published, but I do believe that they offer pretty comprehensive trainings on that program. So it's T-STEP stands for transition. No, I'm not supported. T is for teach, and then supported transition. I don't know. Sorry, but it's T-STEP is the acronym. And that program is really terrific. And they concentrate also on kind of core work skills, including executive functioning, advocacy, really cool things.
Thank you. Question from Linda. How much is the school kit?
Oh, Linda, that's a painful question. I wish that we could give it away for free. That was our initial intention. But then we spent all of our time answering people's questions about, it won't download, or this page isn't printing out right, and we didn't have a server that could manage that. So the current school curriculum is, I think it's available from Brooks for just under $100. If you get it through Amazon, though, it is almost always cheaper, sometimes $85.
Thank you. Question from Jane. Where were the publications Laura mentioned published? Which journals?
Oh, now you're testing my memory. I can tell you confidently about mine. What I could do is post the bibliography into the handouts. If we posted the bibliography right after this was over, will they still be able to see it?
That's a good question. I believe the handouts would only be available during the session, but if you had a link to a website, we could certainly include that in the follow-up email.
Okay, well, they are all in our, posted on our Facebook page. If you are not a fan of Facebook, though, I don't know if it's a public page. Maybe you don't have to be a part of Facebook. We are creating a website that is free and open to everybody, where we would have all of our resources available. I'm not exactly sure of the state of that website, but I think it's unstuckandontarget.com. The online program, the online parent training program, is Unstuck on Target. So you just leave out the "and" for the parent training program, but they are actually linked anyway. And so one website is Unstuck and On Target, and one is Unstuck on Target. Kind of confusing, I know. Sorry.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, a question here from Cassidy. What was the name of the school you mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, where the first trial was?
That was the Ivy Mount School in Rockville, Maryland. Terrific place.
Lovely. A question from Jamie. What is the name of the Kenworthy et al. Study that used the challenge task?
The name of the study, the name of the publication, that one is in 2014, and the challenge task is described there, and it was published in the JCPP, Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry, or Child Psychiatry and Psychology. This is like a pop quiz.
Yeah, I have the title here. It's Randomized Controlled Effectiveness Trial of Executive Function Intervention for Children on the Autism Spectrum.
And it's the Journal of Child
Psychology and Psychiatry. Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Well, let's see. Looks like our final flag question here is from Marjorie. Could you see this approach utilized for young adults in job skills development programs?
John, do you want to take that?
Sure. So I think that's a great question for the high school curriculum, which Dr. Pugliese, Carol Pugliese, is working on. Much of that curriculum is directly related to the launch to adulthood and getting ready to be independent, including job skills. We do lay some of that groundwork in the middle school version as we start to think about longer-term goals and planning for the future. And I know that there are community providers who adapt some of the scripts and visuals for their young adult support program around flexibility skills in the work setting and so forth. So I would say, to answer that question, some of the materials, some of the language and scripts and visuals could certainly be adapted from the existing curricula, and also look forward to the high school curricula and transition to adulthood program, which will directly address those kinds of questions that would come up in a job training program.
I think for the, just to add, I think for the high school curriculum, there's an increased emphasis on appropriate self-advocacy skills, and also on an appreciation of the strengths of neurodiversity, which I think is really helpful with the idea of going out into the career world. One of the last things that I can tell you we tend to develop next, as long as I don't retire first, is a direct to autistic adults version that would probably be an online program as well, instead of an in-person group program. And that is something that, if we get to the point where we are writing that grant, we would do with our co-investigators at the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network and the Autistic Women's and Non-Binary Network, who are partnered with us on pretty much any research that we do these days, because they're so terrific. We do know the need and appreciate the question.
Wonderful. Well, in the interest of time, that's all that we have for today. Thank you, Laura and John, for hosting today's event, for presenting, and for all the wonderful work that you're doing. And thanks to all our attendees today for sitting in on today's webinar, Unstuck and On Target, Improving Young People's Executive Function Skills. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd appreciate it if you could complete that just to provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email with a link to today's recording and materials within the week. On behalf of the Organization for Autism Research and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.